You won't believe what happened to Mrs. Davis. One moment, she was living her quiet, humble life, and the next, she found herself fighting for her freedom. All it took was one phone call to change everything. Clara Davis was not just any 67-year-old woman. She was a cornerstone of her community. A black grandmother known for her warm smile and the way she remembered everyone's birthdays in her neighborhood of Linton, Georgia. She had lived in this small southern town her entire life, raising her children with strong values and faith, volunteering at her local church, and making homemade meals for those in need. People trusted her. She was the type of woman who stopped to talk to children, who helped the elderly cross the street, and who offered advice to young mothers who were struggling. Her life had been defined by simplicity and service. There were no scandals, no enemies, and certainly no reason for suspicion. But in a world that often judges by appearance and convenience rather than truth, her reality was about to be torn apart. One hot afternoon, while Clara was watering her garden and preparing sweet tea, something sinister was happening just a few blocks away. A robbery was underway at a local corner store. The thief, masked and swift, made off with electronics and cash, disappearing before anyone could react. Panic set in, and local authorities were under immediate pressure to solve the crime. But with no suspects and a growing public demand for answers, the police turned their gaze toward someone unexpected: Clara Davis. Why? Because they needed someone to blame, and Clara was nearby, alone, and perhaps most conveniently, black. It made no sense to anyone who knew her. A grandmother committing robbery? The idea was laughable, but logic didn't matter that day. The police arrived at Clara's doorstep with stern faces and cuffs in hand. She opened the door, expecting a friendly visit, perhaps someone looking for directions or help. Instead, she found herself surrounded by officers who accused her of something she couldn't even comprehend. When they told her she was under arrest, Clara thought it had to be a mistake. She had never even received a parking ticket, let alone committed a felony, but their minds were made up. They ignored her pleas, tightened the cuffs, and shoved her into the back of a patrol car, leaving her neighbors in silent shock. Clara was booked for robbery and theft, charges as alien to her character as violence is to peace. She sat in a cold holding cell, wrapped in fear, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. Every creak of the iron door, every flickering fluorescent light above her head made her wonder how this could be real. She thought about her grandchildren and how they might hear about this. She worried about the shame it could bring despite her innocence. Her heart ached not just from the betrayal, but from the terrifying realization that sometimes being innocent isn't enough, especially when your skin is a shade that others have learned to fear. Days passed in a fog of confusion. Clara was told she'd be going to trial. The judge assigned to her case was Judge Arwell, a white man notorious in the community for his swift judgments and thinly veiled racial bias. He had a reputation for handing down harsh sentences, especially to people of color. And the prosecutor, just as determined. He painted Clara as a manipulative criminal who had fooled the town with her sweet demeanor. From the moment the trial was announced, it was clear this wasn't about truth. It was about making someone pay. The case against Clara was paper thin. There were no fingerprints, no stolen items recovered from her home, and no eyewitness who could confidently identify her. The closest thing they had to evidence was a vague statement from someone who said they saw someone who looked like her near the store. That was it. No timeline, no motive, no credible connection. But the courtroom didn't care. The jury, all white, sat stone-faced as the prosecutor spun a tale that relied more on bias than fact. He insinuated that Clara's race somehow made her more likely to commit the crime, using dangerous stereotypes rather than any real argument. Clara's court-appointed attorney, Thomas Divers, was doing his best, but he was drowning. He had too many cases, not enough support, and lacked the firepower needed to dismantle the prosecution's narrative. He believed Clara, but believing her wasn't enough. His voice was quiet, his energy worn thin by years of battling a broken system. Every time he tried to object, the judge shut him down. Every attempt to show Clara's innocence was dismissed with indifference. The courtroom was a stage, but the script had already been written, and it didn't end well for Clara. She sat there, quiet, but not defeated. Her mind raced with prayers, questions, and despair. How could her decades of goodness mean nothing now? How could people who never knew her be so quick to decide her fate? But deep in her heart, a single hope remained, a name, a face, a voice that had always brought her comfort. Her son, Marcus Davis, was not just her child. He was the Attorney General of the United States. He had grown up watching his mother serve others with integrity. He had become the man he was because of her strength. If anyone could help, it was Marcus. And though Clara had never been one to ask for help, especially from her powerful son, this moment was different. This was life or death. With trembling hands and a heart pounding louder than the gavel, Clara asked for a phone call, and when she dialed the number, everything around her seemed to pause. The courtroom bustled behind her, but Clara focused on one thing, the sound of her son's voice on the other end. She explained everything, how she was being framed, how the system had ignored her pleas, how no one believed her because of her race. She didn't need to beg. Marcus knew. He heard the fear in her voice, the heartbreak, the desperation, and that was all it took. In minutes, the tide began to turn. Marcus Davis didn't just make calls. He made noise. He contacted journalists, civil rights lawyers, federal investigators, and high-level officials. News cameras gathered outside the courthouse. Reporters scrambled to cover the story of the Attorney General's mother being falsely accused. Protesters showed up. The courtroom, once a space of silence and assumed guilt, buzzed with uncertainty and pressure. The prosecutor, who had been so confident, began sweating under the spotlight. Judge Arrowell's gavel wavered. The guards, who once ignored Clara, now stood a little straighter around her. The jury leaned in closer, listening not to the biased narrative, but to the absence of real proof. Everything had changed. The judge, realizing that national attention was now upon him, could no longer afford to act with impunity. The prosecutor, too, began to backtrack. The defense was finally heard. And when the final arguments were made, it was clear that Clara Davis should never have been arrested in the first place. The verdict? Not guilty. Clara walked free, not just vindicated, but transformed into a symbol. Her story became more than a local scandal. It became a national wake-up call. It reminded people that justice isn't blind, but sometimes needs to be forced to open its eyes. Clara didn't just win a case. She shook a system. She proved that silence is not an option, and that no one should be judged for the color of their skin, especially when all they've ever given to the world is love. Her fight was personal, but her victory was for everyone, for every mother wrongfully accused, for every child who needs to believe that the system can work, and for every voice that's ever been ignored. When justice seemed out of reach, Clara Davis picked up the phone and made the world listen.